This is Synthesis TV, keeping you on the edge of technology and business.
A very good day to you. I'm Howard Feldman, and this is Synthesis TV. It's August, and I hate this. Why? Because it's Women's Month, and not that I hate Women's Month, God forbid. We don't want to be lynched. But I hate the fact that when it comes to August, we start talking about women's issues. Why shouldn't we be talking about them all the time? That's obviously a bit of a bugbear of mine. That said, at least we have a reason to focus on some of these issues. And today we wanted to talk about women in the workplace. And it's a subject that we've mentioned through some of our other interviews, because a lot of the concerns are overt, a lot of them are covert. And I'm very excited today to be joined by two people. LP Shahim is a cloud engineer at Synthesis. So welcome to you.
Thank you.
And he has brought with him Leanne Germanos. And I'm very, very excited to speak to you, especially about the Embrace project. But can I just get some background here? LP, how did this all happen? Because you're the catalyst here.
Yeah, so I just want to start off with a dad joke first. So, you know,
Okay, not a mom joke, eh?
or a mom joke.
No, let's call it a dad joke. Because moms are really funny, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So Howard, the other day, I heard some music coming out of my printer, and I went to check it out. Turns out it was just jamming.
Oh my gosh.
This is what we live with. This is what we live with. Yeah, that's not fit for TV. You should know. All right. On that, I mean, look, it can only get better, right?
We hope.
All right.
Yeah.
Tell us how this all happened.
So yeah, I just want to preface this conversation by saying that I'm a firm believer in open communication being able to solve the majority of your day-to-day problems. I think whether it be in your relationships, personal or intimate, in your family, or especially at the workplace. And how this all kind of came about and what triggered this whole journey of mine was I went to visit one of my oldest friends and started having the conversation.
How old is one of your oldest friends? 80, 90?
No. Is that okay. I see where you're going with this.
Well, you started it with that ridiculous dad joke. Yeah.
And I started having a conversation with her, but I could tell something was off. She wasn't being herself, and I couldn't pinpoint what it was. And, you know, the longer we spoke and the more comfortable she got, and the more I started to ask the difficult questions, it kind of came up, and she, you know, broke down her walls, and she ended up opening up to me. And she told me that she'd recently been a victim of sexual harassment at the workplace. And I think the most important thing that came out of that conversation for me was the tone that she used. So there were two things in particular. She kind of came across as feeling guilty. So she thought that maybe she had done something to provoke that kind of behavior. And, you know, then she wasn't sure how to feel about that. And then the second thing was that maybe she was being emotional. I think we spoke about it before, emotional or dramatic, or maybe she was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't something that should be taken so seriously. And I think after I'd had that conversation, it kind of gave me confidence to actually go to more women in my life and, you know, ask this question. And that it was staggering for me to see how prevalent it actually was. I think almost all of the women that I spoke to and asked about this, they almost candidly said, you know, this has definitely happened to them, whether it be a small case, small inverted commas, or whether it was a more serious issue, or if it hadn't happened to them, it definitely happened to someone that they knew. And I think, you know, that's just kind of my journey. And I think it was scary for me that, so Howard, I'm 28 now, turning 29, but I mean, it felt like I was living under a rock for 26 years.
So I think men do. Actually, I do think we live under a rock because we are quite dismissive. But let's ask the women in the room.
Yes, please do.
Maybe we'll give her a chance to speak, actually.
You know, I would actually cut you guys some slack.
Right.
I wouldn't say that you guys live under a rock. There are definitely men who are probably more interested in knowing a bit more. But it's almost, it's really difficult actually to explain to someone who's not in the position of a woman what it is that we go through just psychologically on a day-to-day basis. So, I mean, I've had to have this conversation a few times with like my own partner. First, try and contextualize it for them, and then try and see whether or not they grasp how serious the issue is. Like, for example, the fact that whenever we step out the door as a woman, you're already taking in or like doing a bazillion calculations. You're looking to see if the coast is clear, if there's any danger, if there's any threat of anything. And if there is, like, is there a place for you to escape it? And I'm not exaggerating when I say like literally stepping outside of the door of your house. The same, then, I mean, like, then you can imagine how we feel in the workplace.
Well, I was just, as you were saying that, I was thinking that because obviously everything is, the whole of life is on a scale, right? So the worst experience that you're talking about, worst, is physical violence, rape, that type of thing. But that isn't happening every day in the workplace. But there's some form of measure on the same scale that is and is causing an echo of what these terrible things are.
So maybe just to... It might be helpful actually for me to explain what like sexual harassment is in the workplace. So sexual harassment is defined as any unwelcome conduct.
Okay.
And then to be a little bit more specific, there's a particular code that actually breaks that down a little bit more. So unwelcome conduct can be in the form of something verbal, non-verbal, physical, and also what's called quid pro quo, actually. So giving something, sexual favors, for some benefits.
Transactional.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that is what I guess sexual harassment is in the workplace. But there is that gray area, which is, I think, what you're alluding to, that part that is non-verbal, but you can't also actually, there's no way to really prosecute it or to prove it. So somebody giving a woman or any person in the workplace a bit of a look, an objectifying look. I cannot explain or maybe stress enough how threatening that is actually for a woman. And that's something somebody hasn't said. It's not an action, but it's almost like the start of something. And that immediately puts any woman on high alert.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've spoken about it on Synthesis TV before, but when we look at body language, often when I've worked with women in the workplace, they'll speak about the fact that some men, obviously it's not everybody, will come up to them, lean over, almost very dominant and shake hands like that. And it forces the woman to be a little bit subservient, submissive. And that sends that message just at a greeting. So that relationship is set at that level. And how does a woman in the workplace maintain her power without becoming or without being seen to be aggressive? Because a man can get away with being aggressive because men are aggressive. So when he does that, he's just being a male. He's just being aggressive. If she has to push back and she has to do that, she's going to be labeled all sorts of things, isn't she?
I think what you're referring to is like this power differential actually between men and women in the workplace. And I'm not just talking about like seniority. A woman can be in a more senior position to a man who will still make her feel somehow insecure or slightly inferior in the same way that you've just described now, either through...
Well, mine isn't necessarily what I'm not referring to. I'm not referring to sexual. Mine is just much more dominance thing. What you've been referring to is a sexual discomfort, a look. I assume that. Maybe you didn't mean that.
No, earlier on, absolutely.
Yes. Okay, fine.
But building on what you've said now with that, the body language,
the handshake, the dominant handshake. Yeah.
There is a power differential between men and women, regardless of whether it's sexual or not. It's feeling slightly less superior or more or inferior to the opposite sex, whether or not you're in a more senior role. I think I can give you maybe an example of what I mean. So this will be probably more general than I go to a proper personal experience. Sitting in like a boardroom, LP and I were talking about that yesterday, how you can be sitting in a boardroom, let's say filled with men, and there's one woman. Just the way that the discussion turns, how men generally bond in a boardroom is so completely different to, I guess, how women would bond in a boardroom or bond with each other, that it's actually exclusionary. Men will generally like make jokes about some some bravado of something or other, which will automatically exclude a woman in a boardroom. That'll automatically put you on the back foot because you are also trying to create either a rapport with your colleagues, or with a client, but you're on the back foot because, you can't participate in that. Right. That's like one version of it.
Okay, I'll come back to that. So carry on, go with.
The other is more like the sexual misconduct that I'd spoken about a bit earlier on. I was recently in a position where I was at a work function. It wasn't necessarily mine. And a senior, executive, female executive, was basically fondled by another male executive who wasn't as senior as her. And her reaction to that was exactly what LP was describing with his friend. Immediately after having had that happen, her reaction was to grab the top of her dress and to kind of say, but she wasn't even wearing anything revealing.
Wow. As though that would have been the assumption.
That's a reason.
It must have been that, but I wasn't actually. Wow, that's terrible.
And the next thing she said is, I don't know what to do about this. I don't want to make a big deal of it because I don't want to come across
But
emotional.
Is that what women are taught, not to make a big deal? Where does that come from?
I think it's social conditioning, to be honest. We're told that we are the more emotional sex, that we are the caregivers. That's our social role. That's the social construct.
So you're letting your gender down by not being the caregiver, by being the one making a fuss.
Absolutely. But also more than that, I think men, particularly in the workplace, women haven't been in the workplace for that long. I think we all forget that as well.
Right, that's true.
It's only in the last few decades actually that we were allowed to enter the workplace in any profession or any field. But upon entering that, I don't think the workplace has adjusted along with women. It hasn't actually taken into... I've written on this before, and I've spoken about the corporate persona actually being a male.
Well, it is because, in fact, I've also done some research into language in the workplace. Language was determined by men in the workplace. So that means it's almost... it places women at a severe disadvantage. They didn't determine language or corporate language. Men did.
And also the characters of like leadership, what's considered like the ideal and optimum character of a leader, which is to be strong. And it's all the masculine, the social constructs of what a masculine character is. Emotion is considered a weakness. So also if you're in a senior executive position, the last thing you want to do is be emotional, right? Because that's not the trait of a leader. And that is why women always go back to that. Like, am I overreacting? Am I doing this because I am an emotional being?
Sure.
As opposed to understanding that what happened was completely unacceptable. And I think what might even shock you more, Howard, is that there were bystanders. This was literally...
This happened in public.
Yeah. This was in the middle of while we were having dinner, actually.
Wow.
And people that are close to me didn't even know how to react. And I was shocked at their non-reaction. And I think they were shocked and disappointed with themselves for not having known how to react. And I think that that speaks to the fact that we're not even in a place at the moment, whether in the workplace or out of the workplace, to actually stand up and say this is completely unacceptable and not worry about the ramifications for your career, which is what these bystanders were worried about if they responded to this. And also what this particular senior executive, this female victim, was worried about as well. If she made a big deal of this, would it be career limiting for her? Would she be known in the market as that woman who made a fuss?
I think it's a real concern. LP, since you've had these conversations and you've started on trying to understand this, what have your observations been?
So I think we've covered a lot of them, but I think just the reactions of the woman is what scares me, because there's a lot of uncertainty on how to handle it personally and publicly. Nobody knows how to actually go about this problem. We forget as men that, like you mentioned, you're going through 100 different things in your head. If I say something, is this going to be career limiting? And the bystanders, I think, is a big pain point for myself, because had I been put in that situation, I wouldn't know what to do right now. And I think that's the scariest part for me.
Yeah, you actually can't say with any certainty what you would have done in that situation.
And I think if we start building that awareness and we make it more commonplace for every bystander and every victim to know that that's wrong, that there's no gray area. I think that's the goal. I think we have to be preventative about this. We have to be proactive, and we have to build that awareness, because I don't think you can solve the problem retroactively. I think you can make it better, but I don't think you can solve it.
So in other words, it's absolutely critical what you're saying, that men get involved in this. The problem is that men are often told not to get involved in this. In fact, we had a conversation at home where my daughter said to me, "Dad, why haven't you written about abortion? You've got a strong opinion on this. Why haven't you written on the subject?" And I said, "Because I don't have a uterus." And she looked at me and she actually accepted that as an answer, because what I was saying, and in fact, it goes against every belief I have, because I don't believe in swimming in lanes. I believe that you look at a view for the sake of the view, and an opinion for the opinion, you tackle it and challenge it, not because of who wrote it. So it does go against it. But at the same time, I know that if I had to write an article giving my opinion, there will be countless responses saying, "You don't get an opinion." And so to some extent, maybe we're telling men, stay out of this one. But actually men, to a large extent, are the problem here. So how do we do this? How do we say to men, you know what? You need to be part of this conversation, because it doesn't help for women to talk to women.
You have to be
know
part
the
of
problem.
Conversation.
You've lived with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Look,
I don't think you as in you representing all women, but
look, I've been a victim of sexual harassment myself in the workplace. So I can say that, I won't say that I speak for all women, but I've experienced it myself. But I think to answer your question, Howard, there's two parts to that. As the Embrace Project, we strongly believe that although GBVF is perpetrated against women predominantly, it is not a woman's problem. It is a man's problem, because they are predominantly the perpetrators.
Sure.
So there's no point in me talking to another woman about what it feels like in the workplace, how it feels for us to sit in a boardroom, or the power differentials.
Women know this. Even on some level, they know
this.
it. Even if they haven't been in the boardroom,
they're experiencing it themselves on a daily basis, 100%. Whether it's out in the street or in the workplace. So I don't need to tell another woman what it feels like. It's the men that need to understand that, because the only way that sexual harassment and gender-based violence in general ever completely disappear is if the perpetrators stop perpetrating the violence, or that would require men coming into the conversation. I mean, we had a webinar that we wanted to actually put together, and which we eventually did last year for International Women's Month. My organization was quite strong on the point that we were going to have a male speaker who was quite involved in one of the anti-GBV organizations that we supported. We had quite strong opposition from a UK organization that we were partnering with on the webinar, who didn't want a man to be involved in this discussion, which we find actually quite regressive. I think the progressive way of seeing things is to
everybody
include
involved,
especially men.
Right.
But I think the reason why it's such a touchy subject when it comes to men speaking about or defending or whatever it is, a woman's position, is because for so long, women didn't have their own agency. We were always considered...
So you required men to speak for you. So therefore it becomes a little bit uncomfortable if they're speaking for you in these circumstances.
Absolutely.
So I get that. I get that tension.
I think it's a very tight line that you're walking. We need men's buy-in. We need men to talk about gender-based violence and femicide. More than that, we need men to talk to each other.
I was just going to say, and men are fathers, and they grandfathers and uncles and
brothers.
And exactly, if we aren't changing the way in which we communicate, it's not going to change.
And it doesn't help to just have this conversation with your female friends. It's very helpful to understand where we're coming from. And I encourage every man to do that, to speak to any colleague or relation who is female, to understand the perspective. But the real change comes in men speaking to each other, men calling each other out when they talk a particular way or refer to women in a very specific way, which men do. I mean, men have a completely different language when they're talking to each other, right?
100%.
Versus when they're talking to a mixed crowd. And it's in those conversations that you actually need to nip it in the bud.
So LP, has it changed how you talk to other guys?
Definitely.
Really?
Definitely.
Interesting.
I brought this up with Leanne a while ago. I mean, you come across these in your everyday conversations. I mean, when we were back at the office, I mean, someone would say something and I was always a little bit uncomfortable about it. But now, so after that trigger with my friend, seeing how just the way we speak.
The subtle way that
the
speak.
subtle things that we do, how it can actually affect someone without you even knowing. Just by you saying something that might trigger them, you don't know how it's going to trigger someone. You don't know if you make a comment about someone's clothing that maybe they felt really uncomfortable about that. And you might think that you're just being nice, but you don't know what their boundaries are until you have that conversation.
And you don't know what the experience is.
Exactly.
What's interesting as well is there's been a tremendous shift, I think, in leadership style. And COVID has accelerated all of this because all of a sudden we're having meetings in people's homes. So people aren't just those things, those work things that come to the office, but they've got a full range of experience. Men have got children as well, and people at home, and women have, and everybody's got these full lives, and no employer had the luxury of ignoring the emotional roller coaster that people were on over the last couple of years. So that, I think, to a large extent might accelerate a positive change. You're being very skeptical. Why? Wow, I don't need to be a body language expert to
non-verbal.
Wow. You so disagree with me.
To be honest,
Come on, am I seeing things positively?
I think you have a point about now leaders and also I guess companies having sort of insight into somebody's home thanks to COVID now with Zoom and kids running around in the background.
But it's not just the home. It's that somebody's a full person.
I don't think that.
How's this for disagreement?
Wow. It gets better.
Vehement.
I think they can see it, but an acknowledgement is almost something completely different.
Okay.
I think that corporates have always considered personal responsibilities to almost be in conflict with your professional responsibilities. They want
you need to come to Synthesis because and maybe we're just a very, very different environment there. But even the way you're speaking, Look, Synthesis isn't that, but this isn't about that. But
I think I'm fortunate enough at the moment to come from a workspace that sounds very much like Synthesis, which definitely allows you the flexibility and understands that you're a full person.
Right.
But I think the more traditional companies, which is corporate South Africa, still considers that to be a conflict between your professional responsibilities, the fact that you are a full person. And I think that largely impacts women. That's why there's actually been such a huge problem at the moment with women progressing to leadership positions, even though, and I wrote, in that same article where I spoke about the corporate persona being a male, there was a study that was done that shows women generally in South Africa are more educated than men. And that there is still, regardless of that, a massive gender pay gap of 30% between men and women. And that when it comes to top positions, leadership positions, there are actually less women going to management positions than there were before, regardless of the fact that we are now more educated than the men in our space. And the reason for that is this lack of acceptance of personal responsibilities, which women carry most of.
No question.
Or at least, it's skewed towards them. So I hope corporates will come to a point where they don't see it as a conflict, but actually view it in the same way that Synthesis does, that if you take care of the entire person, you also then you have a more productive employee at work as well.
No question, yeah.
So I don't think that penny has dropped
it's not there
quite
yet. We're not there yet. We are way, way out of time. But before I let you go, just give me a very quick overview of Embrace.
So the Embrace Project is actually an anti-gender-based violence and femicide advocacy organization. We started it up literally in COVID. A friend and I, she's a graphics designer and illustrator, and I have a legal background. I'm an attorney. Right. So we sort of married the two. So the Embrace Project is actually quite a unique marriage between art and advocacy. We've collaborated with artists in the past, to sort of bring awareness in their space about gender-based violence, but also used it as a way to generate funds, which we then funneled back to grassroots organizations that we supported. We're also quite involved in the legislative process. We have commented, I think, on 5 or 6 bills at the moment.
That's amazing.
And we're looking now in this month, because everything happens in Women's Month, to launch a constitutional challenge actually against the Department of Justice on the definition of rape.
I think that is fantastic.
So,
good luck to you.
Thank
Keep
you.
doing this magical work that you are doing. LP, thank you for making this introduction. Phenomenal and very important conversation, Leanne. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Howard Feldman. This has been an episode of Synthesis TV. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love your suggestions as to who we should be interviewing, who we should be speaking to. Give us your feedback. Engage with us. You know that's what we want you to do. Have a great day. God bless.